Hi everyone. Thanks a lot for taking the time out today. Today we'll be going a bit into the exactly like where is AI making a difference in terms of operations and specifically invoice processing. To give you a bit of background, I am Rishabh. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Docsumo. We are a document AI platform that helps technology and operations teams automate their document workflows. So we help you like capture, analyze, and validate any sort of document and get data that you can then directly use in your services or operations. And we have been doing this for the last 4 years. We work with quite a few large enterprises across the world. We work with like Arbor, National Debt Relief. Arbor is a listed company in the US. National Debt Relief is 1,000 people, New York-based financial services. In Australia, we work with UC and his team at Walter Tech. We work with Live Life Pharmacy, which is a pharmacy chain in the Australian market. So that's a bit about us. We help you kind of make your processes efficient, become digital, and help you automate. So, UC, what about you? What's your background?
Oh, thanks, Rishabh. Good afternoon, everybody. Very excited of our session today, and certainly a very exciting topic. Look, Walter Tech Group is an Australian-based organization. We specialize on automating and optimizing source-to-pay processes in organizations. So effectively, everything that happens between sourcing a supplier, procuring from a supplier, invoicing processes with the supplier, that we'll obviously touch a little bit deeper today. We also deliver integrations for our customers between different platforms. As you guys all appreciate, there's a big emergence of cloud. There's a lot of different integration needs that organizations have between cloud, on-premise applications, and so forth. And we also help organizations and our customers to integrate with their trading partners, obviously kind of extending our expertise in the supply chain itself. As a business, we are a technology and platform agnostic. So we deliver our services across a variety of P2P, ERP, and invoicing platforms. And as part of our overall delivery and kind of suite of services, we've been using Docsumo for a number of years as our go-to platform on document AI automation to obviously with an obvious objective of helping our customers to get the benefits of that additional automation and self-learning capability. So pleasure to meet you all and look forward to the session today.
Amazing. So to everyone who's listening in, please do we would love your feedback once you go through this webinar. So please do share on LinkedIn. Let us know your thoughts. If there are any questions, feel free to use the chat window and we'll kind of pick them up either in between the slides or towards the end. And at the end of this thing, we'll share the slides along with the recording. So you have this whenever you want to catch up on it later on. As for the webinar itself, we are kind of going to take a deep dive into the problems that we have seen in invoice processing in Australia and especially the healthcare market. We'll kind of look at how AI is kind of able to overcome these challenges. Primarily, we'll kind of see why it was not done so far, and then we'll deep dive into the areas where AI actually has come to the age where it can do the sort of things that were not possible before with previous generation technology. And we'll give you one example where one leading aged care company in the Australian market completely transformed their process and got benefits that they even did not realize that while initiating this transformation. And we'll open it up for Q&A. UC, does that sound like a plan?
That sounds like a brilliant plan. Let's do it, Rishabh.
Let's get into it. So you see, one of the first things, at least the state of the system that we see today, is that typically you would have paper docs or emails come in with PDFs and scans, and someone is kind of manually downloading them, opening them up, entering it into some ERP. Then for certain values, and they would need to do a quality assurance. Let's say if the invoice amount is high, and have an approval flow, after which it kind of enters the system. You see, so what kind of challenges, like why are companies doing this even today? What are the downsides of this?
Look, generally speaking, what we see still most of the time in Australia is we see a lot of, a variety of different type of legacy OCR tools being used, especially in the beginnings of this process, right? On those parts where either a PDF image document or a paper document comes in, being the invoice most of the time, and then the need to capture data out of it, and obviously to achieve a good quality result out of that with the least amount of effort possible, right? Of course. So we see quite a lot of situations there where these legacy OCR tools are just not able to achieve the level of validation that's required, to basically tick the box and say, yes, we know we've received a vendor that is an Australian valid company. We validate their business credentials or ABN details. We have ensured and integrated and checked that this is a pre-existing vendor that exists in our ERP or P2P system, and that the document itself is a true and valid tax invoice in Australia, right? So all of those things today, especially with the emergence of more invoices being delivered via email, those problems have really popped up, because with email comes challenges on impersonalization, suppliers that are not true genuine suppliers, or companies that are not your true genuine suppliers sending documents, and therefore obviously putting the necessity in place to meet those quality assurance processes. So that's generally what we see is there's a lot of legacy technology that's not able to achieve the
Exactly.
benefits.
Exactly. You see, so that has even been our experience. Like, the place where we are is that people have some system in place, but that's something that they would have probably decided upon before 5 years or like 10 years, and that system works and has been kind of just there, but it breaks. And typically that's the place where all of this kind of becomes a manual process, because what comes via email, then everything following that is kind of manual. And like what we have seen also, so yeah, actually, before we go and dive deeper into it, one quick question. Do you currently follow this? Do you see this in your workflow as of today? So, okay, please do put it in the poll questions and or the chat. Um, Okay. So typically, you see, like what we have seen is that since this process is kind of manual, there is a lot of cost associated with it, which doesn't even get accounted for. And like we were discussing previously before this call also, so what we have seen is that healthcare companies spend like they would end up having like a 5 to 6 member team, even if they are doing probably like 3 to 4 thousand invoices a month. And typically that would, besides the actual human effort that goes into it, there is a component associated with everything else that also happens manually, because it's not just the capture piece. There is like validations, compliance, and all of those. And at least our experience is that companies end up spending anywhere between $15 and $20 per invoice. And what has your experience been? What are some of the hidden costs that people don't account for when they do things manually?
Yeah, look, I should mention, Rushabh, that I forgot as part of our introduction to mention that we started off as a consulting company purely just building cost, time and motion studies and business cases on invoice processing in particular. And I would actually claim that your $15 to $20 figure is quite conservative. We've seen processing costs going north of $60 in some of the organizations that we started the work on, and obviously help them to understand with automation and with better accuracy what can they realize in terms of cost savings per invoice, which obviously is a major contributor on anyone's investment into sort of new and more modern and better technologies. And of course, that capture process in the beginning has its own cost. And like you mentioned, Rusab, there's a follow-on cost when it comes to then validating Q&A, approving, sometimes coding. The follow-on P2P process that kind of follows the capture piece. So there certainly is cost across the board. But what is absolutely certain is that if the capture process is not accurate and efficient in the beginning, everything that follows will be more challenging to manage, including the duplicate payments that you've got on the screen, or even the quality assurance. How do you rely on quality assurance if the data capture itself is not accurate? So that's certainly what we've seen, Rusha.
Yeah, and since you mentioned duplicate invoices, we have seen quite a few cases where the costs associated with it, or like direct bottom line impact that it has, is never really accounted for while thinking about what kind of a automated system you want. And for example, what we have seen is that, let's say you get an email, the approval flow is over email. Someone makes a payment, and let's say the vendor kind of replies back, and that same invoice gets processed again because there was no real tracking of like the life cycle of that particular procurement. And as you were mentioning, like this ends up happening because the entire chain is manual. Like the system was built, which was working, but in a manual fashion. And at least we have seen that duplicate invoice happening quite a bit. One quick question: if that's the case, why have companies not been able to, like, duplicate invoices would make any finance team or any owner of the company really like take a look, right? Like, but why have they not been able to change it?
I think there's probably a few different areas on why that is the case. I would say one of them is that organizations in the past, in particular, and with kind of that are using especially legacy solutions, they've had a challenge on identifying and agreeing internally what does a duplicate invoice mean. So is a duplicate invoice a combination of vendor ABN, or maybe the vendor number from the ERP, invoice number, and perhaps invoice date and the amount? But then you get into sort of gray areas, which requires more internal consensus, right? You need to make a decision on, well, if all those three are correct, but one is different. For example, everything up to the invoice number are exactly the same, but then the invoice total varies. For example, is that a duplicate or is it not a duplicate? As an example,
Understood.
Right? But the bottom line really is that the data has to be captured in the beginning in order to get to the an accurate duplicate processing, the validation check right in the first place. So that's been definitely the challenge.
Understood.
And I look, one more thing that I wanted to, Rushab, mention when we spoke about the business case and what constitutes a cost per invoice, and actually how to work out a cost per invoice in your organization, right? Is a lot of businesses, when they are building their own internal business cases, only look at the best case scenario. They look at the invoices, how long it takes for them to validate, how long it takes for them to capture and validate, and then the follow-on processing. What they often fail to capture is the exceptions that actually happens in our experience, maybe 30 to 40% of the time. And the duplicate invoice is a one key example of this, where you may have completed the full invoice processing chain, and the last possible moment when you're paying the invoice, you realize there's a duplicate payment. Or sometimes you even go beyond that, you pay the duplicate, and then luckily your customer was kind enough to tell you that you've actually paid me twice. Not all of them tell you, but some of them will. So
exactly. And sometimes
yeah,
sometimes you only find out about it when you kind of do your annual accounting and you say, hey, like we only have one invoice for these two payments, like what's happening?
That's it. Most of the companies, they enjoy being paid twice, actually. So it's not their money. But yeah, I mean, being able to figure out those exceptions and then
Exactly.
realize how much work goes into resolving that exception should be constituting as part of the business case, and that's why perhaps the $15 to $20 in my opinion is a little bit conservative, because there is big percentage of exceptions that need to be sorted, and sometimes people have to spend 20-25 minutes on per exception to get this solved.
Understood. And you see, what we have seen is that beyond just those bits, like typically now the vendor compliance regulation in Australia is changing. And beyond the internal factors, there is also this added uh, compliance that needs to be done. What is this new compliance that has come in? What kind of vendor onboarding do companies need to do now in the Australian market?
Yeah, look, if I mean, there's a variety of different vendor onboarding compliance regulations that are very applicable to different industries in different ways. You know, APRA regulating the kind of the financial sector and superannuation and some of the aged care players. They have specific frameworks that need to be complied on. But then there is obviously the invoicing regulations, and I look at the very least. You know, in addition to the organizations spending putting effort into achieving a vendor onboarding compliance, the second step, of course, which is more related to our topic here, is the actual invoice and kind of transactional compliance. So are you checking things like vendor's ABN number every time the vendor invoice comes in? Are you checking that they're a valid vendor against your vendor master before you push them into any approval platforms, right? Are you checking perhaps that the bank account details on the invoice are equal to the bank account details in the ERP system, and so forth and so forth? So those at least 3 or 4 key kind of risk and fraud prevention checks are pretty much the bare minimums that today we recommend.
Understood. And you see, it seems that like since the regulation is changing and these kind of seem like critical components that you would want in your invoicing or the entire source to pay system. And typically, like at least our experience has been that the previous generation technology just doesn't cut it, primarily because it was kind of format dependent. It did not have the approval flows, the validation logic built in. Where have you seen that the previous technology really breaks?
Look, I would say most of the vendor compliance from a legacy LCR technology perspective has not been created. You know, things like bank account record checking, the ability to look up into the ATO APIs, or sorry, it's not the ATO API, it's ASIC APIs to check for vendors' ABN details and to make sure that this ABN belongs to the company they claim on the invoice being, and so forth. You know, I've implemented a number of older generation OCR tools in the past myself, and none of them really can achieve this with at least a very with the minimal or reasonable implementation effort. So
exactly,
and I think that's where the difference is.
Yeah, and you see, I remember you mentioning that uh, essentially it was built for a different purpose. It was more of your kind of inventory system and things like that, which then kind of just to complete, they have kind of one patchwork kind of a solution inside of it, but it was not really meant for this entire new way of doing this source to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, even invoice formats today, they are actually easier to recognize than they were years ago, just purely because there's less paper around and there's more PDFs and image formats around, which comes out of, you know, accounting systems like Xero, MYOB, and so forth, that are the, you know, the kind of the bigger accounting packages in Australia. So you know, the modern platforms are built into accepting these formats, but more importantly, I would say that's just the level of accuracy and the ability to kind of self-learn the recognition patterns is where I think the largest difference is. You know,
understood. Got it. You see, so you see, at least it seems that the current process is broken. And that's why, like, if someone today is trying to make a decision as to what is the end system or the end state that they want to reach, that's where they need to think about new technology, because that's where like they will be able to like get a lot of benefit from. And at least our experience in this process is that what you really want is those core building blocks of capturing the data, and making it a digitized format so that then you can run everything else, including validations, vendor checks, and then the approval flows digital. And typically, at least our experience in this domain has been that if you kind of take that transformation, like in a very short period of time, you're able to almost get like 90% plus touchless processing. So what has been your experience when you kind of like have helped customers transform their process? What does the end system look like?
Yeah, look, it's certainly very very close to this in terms of an ideal flow. I mean, effectively taking the feed of the supplier invoices basically through whichever channel they come through, but most of the time via email. I'd say that's more than 90% of the Australian market today is delivering invoices via email. But more importantly, what happens after you receive the email. So an automatic read of the inbox. So there's no human intervention whatsoever involved on grabbing the actual invoice of the inbox, putting it through the OCR tool. The document AI capture platform automatically recognizes the key elements that then constitute as that 90% of straight through processing, and rarely having a human review process in place where you need to validate any of that data. Because if you think about the combination of data being captured and data being validated, only when the validation did not succeed, and perhaps that means something was missing on an invoice, or it failed an ABN check, or it failed a bank account validation, whatever that might be, that anybody would need to touch it. You would want to, from a cost reduction and efficiency perspective, you would want to make sure that your operations only have to touch the exceptions and no longer the norm. And that's really the difference between the 90 to 10%. And that's also the difference between using some of the legacy platforms where you need to
Exactly.
touch the invoice.
Understood. I think we have a question. So the question is, what are the boxes I need to check before automating capture? Is it something I can approach as a standalone goal? You want to take that?
I can. I'm just trying to think. Thanks, Deepak, for your question. What are some boxes I need to check before automating invoice capture? Some boxes around, you mean in internal validation, or what are the key elements? How do you understand the questions, Rushabh? Sorry.
Yeah, you see, I think what Deepak is trying to understand is that what are the components that you need for you to automate? Like, what do you need to check before you kind of like invest into this automation?
Look, I mean, the reality is that the modern technology is pretty much all cloud-based. So there is little from a technology perspective that I would say be separately validated, other than, of course, trialing out the platform, testing its recognition capabilities. All those things are good things to be aware of, right? But I think more importantly, you would need to go through the process on how does the document AI now fit into your future architecture. So kind of mapping where you are today, what the end goal looks like. It's almost like painting a vision on the wall on this is what I want my end result to be, and then starting to track and be advised by that end goal on how you then drive the design of that. So do you need these ABN checks? Do you need the bank account validations, vendor validations, and so forth? It's kind of like working backwards from that vision that you've got for your future architecture. So there's actually surprisingly little differences between the organizations and how this needs to be done. So it's quite a straightforward process. We've done it many times ourselves. But I would say having a clear vision on what you need to achieve is probably the biggest box to tick, because with that vision, you're enabled to build a business case. With that vision, you're able to advise the design process of the solution, and then really move forward. As a technical implementation, this is reasonably small feat in comparison to other enterprise technology projects. We are talking about weeks, not months.
Understood.
On delivery.
Understood. So you see, it seems that process design is one part of it, which is where that vision really helps to define what's the end outcome. One question I had on that is there like, at what point does this, like, should you invest in this, and anything to take care of? Like, is there a org checkbox that you need to keep in mind when you are kind of thinking about this?
Look, we spoke a little bit about the regulations of different industries and different regulatory requirements. So I think understanding your own industry and its requirements and its regulator well, and what the requirements are would be good, and be informed by that as you look at different options in this space. Yeah, look,
And from an organization or a team perspective,
sorry.
from an organization perspective, like how, like if this was automated, like what else in the organization would change?
Look, I would always look at the follow-on procure-to-pay process as part of,
Got it.
once you've sorted the capture side, the approvals, the financial treatment of those invoices, and then of course all the way to the payment of the invoice. I would certainly look at those, because as you look at any cost of processing an invoice, you would always want to look at the end-to-end cost, not just one component of it, even if all of them can be sort of individual components. But from a cost and business case perspective, you would want to be looking at end-to-end and understanding that if you've now improved the capture and recognition and validation of your invoice data, are you leveraging that richness of data now in your follow-on systems?
Understood. And you see that, like, at least that is exactly where like AI kind of makes a difference, because it changes you from a paper level or a PDF file level to the data level, which is where kind of all of these new kind of benefits unlock. And at least we have seen this, taking the case of one agent. We have worked for almost 3 years now, and we have kind of seen many such companies uh, transform their source to pay processes. Let's just take one example. So if you could kind of give a little bit of background about what this company did, what their existing process was, and then we can dive deeper into like what the end state looked like.
Yeah, look, definitely. This is an Australian aged care business. They had more than 200,000 invoices per year. They had quite a large team of data entry operators correcting the results of the legacy OCR platform, and their process was very invoice centric in the beginning of the project. And as we deployed a full source to pay capability for them, we enabled their aged care facilities to begin ordering directly from the system, instead of ordering via phone calls to their suppliers, ordering via emails to their suppliers. So that ordering part first was a major improvement, because now the organization knew exactly that they're buying from their preferred suppliers against a pre-negotiated contracts, and there was a level of compliance obviously achieved through that, but also as a byproduct of that, really quite significant cost savings. Now, once we had sorted out the ordering side, we knew that the reference data is going to be clean. The only challenge that we had remaining was, well, okay, how do we now get the invoices in and accurately captured, so that they, that the automation is achieved through matching against purchase order, and obviously process onwards into the payment. So okay. For those capabilities, we obviously achieved a really high level of automation through accurate invoice capture, but also extracting things like line item detail on descriptions, unit prices, different treatment for different types of invoices and so forth. So it certainly completely turned upside down their resource requirements from having 20 people, 20 plus people in their AP team, into kind of more transitioning and looking at this from a perspective of, okay, well, if we've always had the kind of the team of tactical, tactical resources needing to touch every transaction. Now we can transition these people from their tactical AP roles, which of course has given them a great background on how organization works, into more strategic roles and working in procurement to make sure that the vendor contracts are correct, the catalogs the pricing is correct, the catalogs they publish for their products are correct, and so forth. So because there was no more need having people worrying about the invoicing process anymore, right? The kind of the tactical focus from AP moved into a strategic focus around the procurement process.
Procurement. That's a great point, you see. Like typically like that has also been our experience working in this space, because typically all people think about it, this automation, when it starts off at that one place saying that, hey, like we have these many people, we are doing this manually, can we kind of automate? But when you actually look deeper into the entire system design, you'll see that other components are also manual. So as you mentioned, that entire procurement was manual. Like that means that you really don't have data on what's happening in that region. And then of course, like your payment system is also kind of broken, which is where you need to like kind of take, again, there also you don't have data which you cannot then use to match or do any sort of other higher value things. And and although people start at that point saying that, hey, like need to digitize, as you mentioned, like typically these are kind of procurement problems rather than just invoice processing problems, because once you kind of have a look at that, you would then want that people to do more higher value added tasks and actually be part of the negotiations, or like kind of help in that entire process than just doing like the key entry. And our experience is that a lot of the times when companies or CFOs or directors of finance are thinking about it, the short term goal is pretty clear, but the longer term is where they kind of really don't have that insight as to how that will transform their company. Because it seems like a simple enough transformation, but it actually has a lot of cascading benefits, because it's just like it affects, this data kind of affects how you procure and how you do business completely.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think good point on the long-term view and the importance on having clarity on that, even before you start, right? And when you're looking at the options and when you're building a roadmap on how do you get to that end state. But at the same time, this was an example of a large aged care business in Australia. For some of the companies we've seen, they're very comfortable and sometimes required to really focus just improving the invoicing process. They may not have the size, scale, or even the type of supply chain that enables them to put the effort into the procurement. Maybe they'll need to continue down the invoice processing line, which is okay. So different kind of profiles and different solutions apply to different organizations,
Correct.
depending on the size and the industry.
Makes sense, Izzy. Like cookie cutter approach doesn't work. You really need to, as you mentioned, that what is the end goal has to be clear before you kind of embark on this automation. And
Absolutely.
what we have seen is that, as we are mentioning, like, so AI kind of has affected almost the entire workflow over here. Like, let's dive a little bit deeper into it. And at least what we have seen and where Docsumo plays a role is the entire data capture and a bit of the matching and validation rule. So maybe like if you can just give an example of like in specific buckets, like where do we see AI making that difference?
Yeah, look, I think the data extraction is probably the starting point of this overall kind of value chain, right? A 5-step value chain. And I think that's where probably the largest difference is, because if you were using some legacy OCR tools, you would typically need to have people building templates, people maybe doing manual extraction or data entry in worst cases, right, out of the documents, which is very, very error prone, right? And you can't really build a very solid 5-step process out of the first step that already fails or is error prone. So I would say in the beginning of the process, the majority of the benefit is being achieved, because you no longer need a big team of people extracting the data or validating the data. You basically have a self-learning capability powering your data extraction process, and then with through data matching and rule-based validations, will you identify if something was wrong with the invoice, if something was missing on the invoice, and so forth. So it kind of follows on in its sophistication, if you will. But I would say in the
Correct.
beginning of this is where AI plays the largest part.
Correct. And typically, our experience in this is that this automation was not just possible because, as we have seen in the last couple of months, GPT has kind of exploded. And what that means is that the models, the AI models, have really come along that way where what they were not able to do previously is being able to do. So, for example, at least in the capture part, what we have seen is that changing formats would also mean that you might have like changing fields and a few other differences. Like not everyone is going to send the same invoice in the same way, and even their data would kind of change. So that entire piece of taking you can almost think of that document as a natural language text. Someone has kind of written by hand, and someone else has a job to read and make sense out of it. And that is where the AI has come along the way, where it is able to take this really unstructured data and kind of standardize it, put it in a format that then can be fed directly into downstream systems to take decisions on. And our experience over here has been that these models have come to a point where you really don't need to put that initial effort of like training them or like doing anything. It has come to a point where you can just ask and they will give a response. Like it really has come to that point. And that is where we have seen not just invoice processing, but overall the entire document AI space blow up, because we like 10 years ago, no one would have imagined that one model could kind of understand all languages and all sorts of documents. That's just like mind blowing in the in the scale and the impact that it can create. So you see, now that we have like we are diving deeper into it, do you see anywhere else? What are the other pieces that you have seen and implemented? How do you see someone who is at that position trying to figure out like, hey, we need a system change, actually go about it?
Yeah, look, a lot of the time, you know, there's obviously a lot of variety in this space in terms of how suppliers can today deliver invoices to an organization, and then with them comes the challenge of identifying the channels that can actually give you an accurate matching, rule-based validation, compliance checking process, right? And so we've specifically focused ourselves into realizing this sort of process, because we can then build the ABN checks, the vendor validations and so forth as part of the overall process. So we always can rely on what comes out of the step 5 is the document that it's ready to pay. We know it belongs to a right supplier. We know it's a valid Australian company. We know that the invoice meets the tax invoice rules. Because it didn't, it would have come out latest in step 4, and that's what this is all about. You know, getting to the end of step 4 or getting to the beginning of step 5 with minimum human intervention, if you will, right? Because
exactly,
you've got automatic learning models to doing the most of the heavy lifting for you.
Understood, got it. So yeah, I think you see, thanks a lot for taking the time out today. For all our audience who are kind of doing the things manually, both UC and I are like really into that entire source to pay system. We would love to have a conversation with you and see how we are doing things. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to us, and we kind of would like to help you to get to a state where you're able to like at least do 90% plus touchless processing and see your efficiencies more than double. And of course, like since it is a digitized way of doing things, for most of the cases, it's completely automated. So you can get like really fast at the whole process. Um, and typically, like some of the other trends that we have seen is where natural language processors have like one of the core building blocks now available to enterprises are these models that kind of work on natural language and give you really good output that you can then digitize and consume. So greater automation. So yeah, open to questions and answers if you have any. I think we had one. Let me have a check. No. Rucha, do we have any questions?
Yes, Rishabh. Yes, I'll read out one of them.
Yeah.
So yes, so Pankaj has asked, how safe is my data if I use a cloud-based system, and what are the regulations that are usually followed, or what are the regulations that you follow?
Oh, really good question, Pankaj. You see, I can take at least the stab on the capture side of things, and then if you could explain from the process side of things, that would be great.
Yeah, certainly.
So at least Pankaj, in our sense, what we have seen is that the your data remains yours in the sense that this data doesn't flow back to the AI models that have given that output because these models were already trained on the internet. They already have all of this in their particular data set. And normally, what ends up happening is that we help you to fine tune those models on your data and kind of improve them, but that also is limited and just in your control. So you can kind of delete that data at any point in time. You have geolocation, so it's in the Australian market. All of those kind of come baked into the system. So at any point, your data is always in your control. You can delete it, change it, get it back on your side. And the models also are kind of yours. You really don't, there's no data going from your procurement system to the AI models. You see, what are the other things in terms of data compliance that needs to be taken care of?
There's probably two more elements, Rushabh, in addition to that. I think one is obviously the processes built for the data validation and the rule-based validation that we discussed on one of the previous slides. So on that, obviously the validations are always built for in a way that it actually retains no data. So effectively, it's only in flight for the time period that the particular document is being validated. So that's an important thing to remember. Of course, that's in addition to that, there's quite a strong security credentials at play here as well. So that's probably the second area. Third one, of course, is a variety of APIs that we may or may not decide to use as part of the implementation. As an example, the ASIC ABN validation that we just discussed. Look, of course, every Australian company's data is already with ASIC, so there's not much to worry about there. But in addition to that, what the ASIC API, for example, requires is purely the ABN number and the extracted name, supplier name from the document. It doesn't require the full invoice payload, and effectively based on that, it gives us a response that says it's either correct or it's not correct. And if it's not correct, then it goes into the exception process. So again, another security element, just to mention that obviously that integration with the APIs is only for the elements of the data that's been validated. It's not for the full invoice payload. And again, the full invoice payload is never retained in the platform.
Understood. So it seems that all the three components, even on the capture, the in-flight data, and then like pinging ASIC and sending the ABN, like there is no data leakage. It's mostly in flight and ends up in the ERP.
Correct. So in this case, either the P2P or the ERP system, whatever we would have as the system for that step 5, right? That would be the only place where which actually retains the data, which is already part of your existing architecture and systems.
Understood. So you see, let's just take one last question and then we can end for the day. So yeah, so I think we can take care. So what's the typical accuracy or completeness of this? Like if you kind of embark on this AI invoice processing, what kind of accuracy can you achieve?
So generally speaking, I would actually claim it's going to be pretty much 100%. And the reason I'm saying this, everybody's going to think, oh my goodness, I'm used to 95.5% because that's what my old OCR platform. It's the invoice goes back for corrections, right? So and that's what I mean with 100%. So it's not just a kind of a blank statement. It's actually true.
Yeah. And I completely agree to that. As we have seen, right? Like for any kind of touchless processing to happen, you would need that 100% accurate data and the validation layers that kind of make sure that nothing else gets passed through. So Yeah, you see, it was great having you today on this webinar. Really nice to see. Yes,
Yes, we have an interesting question from one of the attendees. I would like to read out, and this is for you and
sure,
Hassan, both of you. How
sure.
can healthcare organizations measure the ROI of AI in invoice processing, and what matrix should they track?
Oh, that's a really good question. You see, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we had another 2 hours because that's a very good question. And I could easily go 2 hours, but I'll try to constrain my answer into 3 minutes. So look, we whenever measuring a business case, you would want to measure elements like the amount of human touches that goes into a particular document. And remember, we talked about in the previous screen, not just the successful cases, but take a snapshot of, let's say, 200, 300 invoices that have arrived into your organization and measure how many touch points that invoice has, how long does each of the touch points take, and again, what type of salaries and roles are involved on touching that invoice. So you know that would be the kind of the operational cost, the kind of the easy to measure cost, right? There's also then those sort of soft benefits that you can look at. For example, well, what is the value of increasing or decreasing your risk profile on leading into a duplicate payment? You know, what is the cost of duplicate payments? You know, try to find a few from your 12 months of operations and measure what would be the cost of those, especially, and that's perhaps the hard part of the business casing, is that you don't actually always know of those cases until you implement something like this, right? Because you might be putting duplicates without yourself knowing, right?
Correct.
So it's probably that operational human time. It's that it's those soft benefits like reducing risk, and then of course, as part of all of that is the self-learning capability, which simply just ties into that reduction of kind of operators' time on needing to touch the document.
Yeah, really good insight over there. You see, like it's the ROI is dependent not just on the actual invoice processing, but also the risks and the actual impact it has on the entire procurement cycle. So thanks a lot, UC, for this conversation. It was nice having you here and deep diving into uh, the different elements and seeing like where AI is making a difference. So yeah, if anyone in the audience would like to have a 30-minute chat with us, please let us know. We'll send you a follow-up email, and happy to see how we are doing things and where you could make a difference. So thanks a lot, UC. And thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Rushabh.